Jason Carter's Ferrari gleamed under the California sun, a symbol of power everyone at the company feared and admired. But today all that confidence was about to be challenged not by a rival CEO, but by Henry Johnson, the quiet janitor who parked his battered 1930 Cadillac right in Jason's spot. One simple act and a bet was made that would shake the company's hierarchy to its core. Jason Carter's Ferrari rolled into the company parking lot like a red comet slicing through the morning haze of Silicon Valley. The engine's growl turned heads even before the car came to a stop, and employees instinctively stepped aside, murmuring among themselves. Jason liked it this way. He liked the way people reacted to his presence, the subtle bowing to power that seemed automatic whenever he appeared. This wasn't just a parking lot, it was his stage. Every day he parked in the same spot, every day he was admired for his success, his precision, his wealth. The Ferrari gleamed, reflecting the California sun and, more importantly, the image of control Jason so carefully curated. He stepped out, adjusting his tailored jacket, letting the subtle click of his shoes on concrete underscore the rhythm of authority he felt belongs to him. His gaze swept over the lot, noting who was watching, who had arrived early, who might become a future investor or a potential competitor. For Jason, every glance was data, every reaction a measurement of his influence. Today, though, something felt different. There was a tension in the air he couldn't immediately place, like static before a storm. He stopped in front of his usual parking space and froze. Cadillac, black and faded with age, was parked there, taking up the very spot he had claimed for years. It was battered, worn, and completely out of place among the shiny Teslas, electric SUVs, and sleek sedans of his employees. The paint was chipped, the chrome dulled by decades of neglect, and the tires sagged slightly under years of use. Jason's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to people challenging his routine. The sight of this car, this relic from another era, made him feel something unfamiliar, a stir of irritation. He moved closer, striding past the crowd that had already begun to gather. Phones clicked quietly, capturing the moment like paparazzi documenting a scandal. Jason noticed the whispers immediately, the quick sideways glances, the subtle smiles held back. He didn't like it. The owner of the Cadillac emerged from behind the car. Henry Johnson was an older man, his back slightly curved from decades of work, wearing worn work pants and a simple shirt. Keys jingled in his hand, and a towel hung over his shoulder, smudged from years of cleaning. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world, and reached for the door of the Cadillac. Jason took a step closer, ready to assert his authority. "You parked here," he said, his tone carrying that sharp edge he reserved for people who crossed him. Henry looked up briefly, nodded, and continued unlocking the door. No hesitation, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement. The crowd murmured, sensing the tension but unsure what would happen next. Jason's irritation grew. He liked to be in control, liked to dominate the room, the lot, and even the attention of everyone present. Seeing this man, who he had walked past hundreds of times without noticing, calmly take his spot was an affront he couldn't ignore. All other spaces were full, Henry said softly, almost conversationally, brushing his hands on the towel. Jason laughed, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, loud, calculated, meant to intimidate. "You thought parking your junk next to my Ferrari was a good idea?" he asked, motioning to the car, making sure every phone camera caught the glare. Some employees smirked, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. Others whispered to each other, predicting an embarrassing moment for the older man. Jason fed on the attention. He thrived on it. But Henry didn't react. He adjusted his glasses, checked the Cadillac's mirror, and prepared himself in the way someone does before performing a task they've done countless times in private. His movements were methodical, careful, almost ceremonial. He exuded a confidence born of decades of experience and practice, a subtle reminder that mastery didn't always come with fanfare or flashy displays. Jason's irritation intensified. Control was slipping, even in the small parking lot that had always been his domain. Jason leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough so only Henry could hear. "You know who owns this place, right?" The words were meant to dominate, to remind Henry of the hierarchy, to make him squirm. Henry didn't flinch. He just nodded slightly, a minimal gesture that somehow held more weight than 1,000 words of defiance. Jason's eyes scanned the crowd. Phones were raised, employees whispering, the sense of drama mounting. "Tell you what," Jason said, voice smooth and confident. "Since you were brave enough to park next to me, let's make it interesting. Race me. If your car beats mine, you can have my company." The words cut through the lot. Gasps echoed. Phones tilted to capture every detail. The spectacle was alive. Henry paused for a moment, fingers tapping lightly against the Cadillac, assessing the challenge. Then he looked up at Jason, calm and measured. "You were sure about this?" he asked. Jason grinned, the kind of self-assured smile that made people take notice. "Absolutely." The murmurs grew louder. Employees pressed closer, forming a semi-circle. eager to witness what they assumed would be an inevitable humiliation. Henry opened the hood slowly, checking the engine and the belts, making minor adjustments as though preparing for an everyday drive rather than a high-stakes showdown. Jason strutted around his Ferrari, pointing out its features to anyone who would listen, making sure every reflection, every gleam, every sound of power was noted. The crowd was captivated, but Henry remained a study in quiet focus. Every breath, every small motion communicated control without arrogance. Jason, despite his bravado, felt a prickling unease. By the time the starting line was ready, a sense of anticipation had electrified the lot. Jason revved the Ferrari, a roar that rattled windows and made some employees flinch. Henry slid into the Cadillac and adjusted his seat with calm precision. When the signal came, Jason shot forward like a rocket. Tires screamed. The Ferrari surged, all engine and aggression. Henry moved as if riding the rhythm of the road itself, steady, consistent, calculated. The crowd cheered, laughing at what they thought would be a short, predictable spectacle. And then, midway through the course, Jason's Ferrari faltered. The engine cuffed, the pedal resisted, warning lights blinked. Jason pressed harder, but the car shuddered, stuttered, and died. Silence fell in the lot, thick and heavy. Phones still rolled, capturing every stunned expression, every gulp of disbelief. Henry's Cadillac hummed forward, steady and unassuming, closing the distance with measured patience. Jason's face drained of color as he realized the challenge was no longer in his hands. Henry pulled the Cadillac alongside the stalled Ferrari. "Need a lift?" he asked calmly. Jason hesitated, then climbed in without a word. The Cadillac continued its slow, steady pace, passing the finish line with quiet dignity. The crowd erupted, not in mockery, but in astonishment. The spectacle had ended, but the lesson lingered. Mastery, patience, and respect had triumphed over arrogance and power. Jason's dominance had been appended, and everyone present understood that control could shift in an instant, and not always in the way expected. Henry, silent and composed, drove away, leaving a wake of respect and reflection in his path. The moment Henry Johnson parked his battered 1930 Cadillac in Jason Carter's usual spot, a ripple of disbelief spread through the company parking lot. Employees stopped mid-step, phones raised to capture the moment, whispers bouncing from group to group. The Cadillac's faded black paint and rusted trim stood in stark contrast to the rows of gleaming modern cars that dominated the lot. Jason, stepping out of his Ferrari, froze as his eyes locked onto the offending vehicle. He had always prided himself on control, on the predictable order of his environment. The sight of a car so clearly out of place right where he claimed ownership of the morning air jolted him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Henry emerged from behind the Cadillac, keys jingling in one hand, a worn towel draped over his shoulder. His movements were deliberate, steady, and precise, the kind of calm that only comes from years of routine and experience. He opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and adjusted the rearview mirror, as though he had no awareness of the growing crowd around him. The lot, usually buzzing with morning chatter, had quieted, the collective gaze of the employees fixed on this unlikely challenger. Jason's mouth tightened. He could feel the stirrings of irritation, the subtle burn of his pride being tested. A few employees whispered to each other, speculating about what Jason might do. Some were genuinely curious. Others smirked, sensing that for once the arrogant CEO might meet a situation he couldn't control. Jason strode toward Henry, the leather of his shoes squeaking softly against the asphalt. "You parked here," he said, the words sharp, edged with authority. Henry looked up briefly, nodded, and returned to adjusting his seat and the mirror. He didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't back down. He simply existed as he always had, steady and confident. The simplicity of his presence was infuriating to Jason. Jason's irritation began to transform into a mixture of disbelief and opportunity. Here was a man who seemed entirely unconcerned with status or wealth, whose calm defiance directly challenged Jason's sense of superiority. The crowd sensed it, and their whispers turned to a murmur of anticipation. Phones tilted higher, recording the unfolding scene. Some employees were audibly laughing, a subtle edge to the humor that suggested they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jason, sensing the eyes of everyone on him, decided he would turn this into a spectacle, one where he could still assert dominance. "You thought parking your junk next to my Ferrari was a good idea?" Jason asked, emphasizing the contrast between his sleek, powerful machine and the Cadillac that Henry drove with such quiet confidence. His voice carried, and the surrounding employees flinched slightly at the sharpness. Some smiled, secretly enjoying the confrontation, while others felt the tension rise like a storm ready to break. Jason's ego demanded that he not just confront, but humiliate. He had no idea how Henry would respond, but his instincts told him that the older man would not be intimidated. Henry reached for the dashboard, checking the Cadillac's controls, twisting knobs, and testing the pedals with careful, measured movements. Every motion was deliberate, each action a testament to decades of experience. Jason circled his Ferrari, flexing his presence like a predator surveying territory. The engine growled under his touch, and he could feel the collective admiration of the crowd as they whispered about his machine, the status it represented. Yet Henry remained untouched by the display, unbothered by the Ferrari's roar or Jason's confidence. The older man's focus was absolute, his calm a counterweight to Jason's escalating tension. Then, in a moment that seemed almost theatrical, Jason leaned closer to Henry, lowering his voice just enough so that only he could hear. "You know who owns this place, right?" he said, the words intended to remind Henry of the hierarchy, the power imbalance. Henry responded with a small nod, acknowledging the fact without surrendering any ground. That single motion, almost imperceptible, carried more weight than 1,000 words. The crowd sensed it, and their whispers grew louder, the energy building like a wave cresting before a storm. Jason's mind raced. How could a man so ordinary, so overlooked, radiate this kind of confidence? Jason decided to escalate. "Tell you what," he said, voice smooth, confident, and just sharp enough to draw every ear in the lot. "Since you were brave enough to park next to me, let's make it interesting. Race me. If your car beats mine, you can have my company." The words landed like a bomb. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Phones tilted, cameras zooming in to catch the reactions. Employees whispered, some in disbelief, some in amusement, some quietly hoping for a spectacle unlike anything they had seen in the company's history. Henry paused, considering the challenge with deliberate care. His fingers tapped lightly against the Cadillac, a subtle rhythm that suggested patience, focus, and absolute control. Jason grinned, confident in the absurdity of the proposition. There was no way this old car, this man, could pose a real challenge to his Ferrari. The crowd, sensing the tension, pressed closer. Some employees murmured predictions of humiliation. Others admired the quiet confidence Henry projected. As the starting line was prepared, a sense of anticipation filled the lot. The sun reflected off the polished surface of Jason's Ferrari, casting a dazzling light that symbolized his wealth and status. But the Cadillac sat steady, humble, and resolute, a quiet reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Jason revved the Ferrari, the roar echoing across the asphalt, a reminder of power, speed, and superiority. Henry slid into the Cadillac, adjusting his seat with meticulous care. He didn't speak. He didn't react to the Ferrari's growl. He simply prepared, steady, ready to engage in the challenge on his own terms. Employees leaned forward, watching every subtle motion, every breath, every adjustment. The air seemed to thrum with tension, a collective anticipation that made the lot feel alive, electric with possibility. The starting signal came. Jason shot forward, tires screaming, the engine surging with violent energy. The Ferrari leapt ahead with power and aggression, a display of raw wealth in motion. Henry's Cadillac moved smoothly, deliberately, keeping pace with careful calculation rather than brute force. The crowd followed, phones capturing every moment. Whispers, laughter, and gasps mingled as people tried to predict the outcome. Jason's confidence soared, certain of his impending victory, certain that Henry would be humbled before them all. But Henry's calm control over the Cadillac, the precision of his movements, the decades of experience embedded in his every adjustment, created a tension that Jason had not anticipated. Employees leaned closer, sensing the unexpected challenge, and the energy in the lot shifted. Jason's mind began to race, calculating speed, torque, and distance, but Henry's measured pace left him guessing. He had underestimated the significance of patience, consistency, and composure. As the race progressed, Jason's frustration grew. The Cadillac, so unassuming and steady, remained within reach, closing the psychological gap even as the Ferrari roared ahead. Employees gasped, whispered, and filmed, realizing that what they had assumed would be a one-sided spectacle was no longer predictable. Jason's confidence, once absolute, wavered. The parking lot, which had been his stage, had become a theater of suspense where the old janitor had become the protagonist. By the halfway point, Jason's Ferrari began to show signs of strain. The engine cuffed, sputtered, and hesitated. Warning lights blinked on the dashboard, and a sharp sense of panic edged into his demeanor. Henry's Cadillac continued, steady, consistent, unbothered by the chaos that had overtaken the supposedly superior vehicle. Employees leaned closer, phones raised high, capturing the drama as it unfolded. Jason realized that control, the thing he had always relied on, was slipping. The race was no longer about speed alone. It was about mastery, patience, and the quiet strength that Henry embodied. The race continued, tension building with every foot of asphalt, and the employees followed along, murmuring about the unexpected turn of events. Jason's mind raced, trying to calculate how he could regain control, how he could assert dominance once again. But Henry's calm, deliberate, and unflappable approach kept him ahead. A living reminder that appearances and arrogance often fail when met with focus and skill. The moment had arrived. Jason Carter gripped the steering wheel of his Ferrari with the kind of anticipation only wealth and ego could produce. The engine's roar vibrated through the asphalt beneath him, a declaration of power and superiority that he was certain no one could challenge. Employees lined the sides of the lot, phones raised, eager to capture the spectacle. Henry Johnson adjusted the rearview mirror of his Cadillac, taking a deep breath and pressing his hands against the worn steering wheel. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Jason's intensity. Every movement Henry made communicated years of experience, quiet confidence, and a deep understanding of machinery that went beyond raw speed. The starting signal came, a sharp wave from one of the supervisors who had reluctantly agreed to officiate the event. Jason's Ferrari leapt forward like a predator, tires screeching against the asphalt, sending clouds of dust into the hot morning air. The sound was deafening, a roar that made even seasoned employees flinch. Henry's Cadillac rolled forward steadily, the engine humming with a soft, consistent rhythm. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was precise. Every second, every inch of movement was controlled, measured, and intentional. The contrast between the two vehicles became the story itself: raw, aggressive power versus quiet, unassuming mastery. The crowd followed along the sides of the course, running alongside where possible, some cheering, others holding their breath. They were caught in a swirl of disbelief and excitement. Jason looked over at Henry, expecting to see panic, strain, or desperation. He saw none. Henry's eyes were focused, not on the Ferrari, not on the crowd, but on the path ahead. There was a rhythm to his movements, a subtle synchronization with the road that Jason couldn't comprehend. Every gear shift, every adjustment of the pedals was deliberate, revealing a man who had spent decades mastering control rather than flaunting power. Jason accelerated, pushing the Ferrari to its limits. The engine screamed, begging for more fuel, more speed. He weaved slightly, trying to assert dominance, to remind everyone that this was his world, and the race should be an inevitable victory. Employees shouted, some laughing nervously, some cheering, capturing every frame with their phones. The Ferrari surged ahead, but Henry's Cadillac maintained a steady pace, gradually closing the psychological gap despite Jason's explosive lead. Jason's confidence began to waver slightly. The old car was slower, yes, but there was a persistence, a consistency that he had not accounted for. The halfway point arrived faster than Jason anticipated. He glanced at the dashboard and noticed the first warning lights blinking faintly. A soft sputter of the engine made him flinch. The roar of the Ferrari, once commanding, now seemed uneven, almost strained. He pressed the accelerator harder, willing the machine to obey his will, but it responded with resistance, coughing under the sudden demand. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he gripped the wheel tighter, a nervous tic that betrayed the first cracks in his facade of invincibility. Employees near the course started to notice, whispers running through the crowd like wildfire. Phones raised higher, capturing every moment of Jason's growing frustration. Meanwhile, Henry continued. The Cadillac moved forward with a steady hum, no theatrics, no sudden surges, just a reliable, measured progression. Every gear change was smooth, every adjustment seamless. He navigated the turns with the kind of precision that came only from intimate knowledge of a vehicle, from familiarity built over decades. The crowd began to murmur in awe. What was once a spectacle of Jason's dominance was transforming into a lesson on patience, skill, and focus. People exchanged glances, whispers of disbelief punctuating the hot morning air. Jason's advantage, once absolute, was now tenuous. Jason's frustration mounted. He glanced at Henry, expecting hesitation, expecting fear, expecting the slightest sign of weakness. Henry's expression remained calm, determined, and steady. Jason pressed harder, leaning into the curves, forcing the Ferrari to respond. The tires squealed, the engine roared, and for a moment it seemed he might regain control. But then, a sudden jerk of the car reminded him of the mechanical limits he had ignored in his rush to display power. Warning lights blinked furiously across the dashboard, accompanied by a harsh grinding sound from the engine. Panic crept into his mind. He had trained for board meetings, presentations, and negotiations, but he had not prepared for the simple, inevitable truth that machines like people could fail at the worst possible moment. Henry's Cadillac glided past him in those moments of Ferrari struggle. The crowd gasped, some breaking into cheers, others exchanging bewildered glances. The old car, once underestimated and mocked, carried Henry forward with a quiet, unwavering determination. Every inch forward was a testament to experience, knowledge, and the patience that Jason had never valued. The dynamics of the race had shifted completely. Jason was no longer in control, and the crowd sensed it instantly. Phones zoomed in on his tense expression, capturing the unraveling of the man who had always relied on wealth, speed, and ego to dominate. As Jason struggled to keep the Ferrari moving, Henry reached the point where a simple adjustment of the gas pedal and careful steering allowed the Cadillac to align perfectly with the remaining stretch of road. There was no urgency in his movements, only precision. Every employee watching felt a mix of disbelief and admiration. The man they had always overlooked, The janitor, whose work had gone unnoticed, had taken control of a moment that Jason had assumed would showcase his superiority. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The older, slower, less glamorous car was now the symbol of victory in the making. Jason's mind raced. He had to do something, anything, to regain the upper hand. He pressed the accelerator harder, ignoring the grinding sounds, ignoring the lights flashing on the dashboard. The engine struggled, the tires burned against the asphalt, and the Ferrari shuddered violently. Jason's grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles white, heart racing. But Henry didn't rush. The Cadillac moved steadily, almost effortlessly, every motion controlled, efficient, and intentional. It was the antithesis of Jason's aggressive display of power. The final stretch loomed ahead. Jason's Ferrari was trembling, heat radiating from the engine, smoke curling faintly from under the hood. Henry's Cadillac rolled forward, its worn body vibrating slightly but moving with a precision that made the crowd lean in, holding their breath. Every phone in the lot captured the moment, the Ferrari struggling, the Cadillac steady, the employees' faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Jason's ego, once towering and untouchable, was faltering in real time. The spectators sensed the reversal, the complete overturn of expectations. Jason's last desperate push failed. The Ferrari cuffed, sputtered, and came to a complete stop. He slammed the wheel, muttered curses under his breath, and stared at the Cadillac approaching. Henry's car moved forward with the quiet hum of confidence, carrying him toward the finish line. Employees cheered, laughed, and gasped simultaneously. The unexpected had become reality. Jason's dominance, built on speed, wealth, and status, had been undone by experience, patience, and steady resolve. As the Cadillac crossed the finish line, Henry eased the car to a stop. He opened the door, gestured for Jason to step in, and offered a simple, calm question: "Want to finish this?" Jason hesitated, swallowing hard, and climbed into the Cadillac without protest. The crowd erupted, cameras rolling, phones capturing the surreal image of the wealthy CEO riding with the janitor he had underestimated. The message was clear: mastery, patience, and focus could triumph over arrogance, raw power, and speed. The lesson resonated through the company and the employees present, a living reminder that success and respect were earned through skill, consistency, and character, not just flashy displays or intimidation. Jason Carter sat in the driver's seat of his stalled Ferrari, chest heaving, hands trembling slightly as he processed the impossible. The engine had died, leaving him powerless in front of everyone. Phones were pointed directly at him, capturing the slow unraveling of the man who had built his reputation on speed, wealth, and dominance. Henry Johnson's Cadillac hummed beside him, steady, reliable, and in complete control. Jason's initial fury had transformed into disbelief, then into a creeping realization that he was no longer in command of the situation. The parking lot, once a stage for his authority, had become a theater for humility. Every employee watching sensed the shift, and whispers ran like wildfire among the crowd. The spectacle had changed from a display of power to a lesson in patience, skill, and quiet confidence. Henry reached over, unlocking the passenger side door of the Cadillac. "Want to finish this?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Jason hesitated, a mix of pride and resignation flickering across his face. He had been prepared to dominate, to win, to assert control, and now he had no choice but to accept Henry's offer. He climbed in, lowering himself into the cracked leather seat, and the Cadillac moved forward once again, steady and deliberate. The hum of the engine was soft but confident, a stark contrast to the violent roar of the Ferrari. Employees crowded closer, some laughing nervously, others whispering in awe. The message was undeniable: control and mastery did not always roar. Sometimes they persisted quietly and consistently. As they approached the finish line, the crowd's energy shifted. The adrenaline that had fueled Jason's arrogance now fueled the employees' amazement. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every second of the surreal moment. Jason, the man who had once symbolized wealth and dominance, was now riding as a passenger in a car he had considered obsolete. Henry's focus never wavered. He guided the Cadillac smoothly, effortlessly, the engine humming with a steady rhythm that reminded everyone that consistency often outlasted flashiness. Every turn was calculated, every movement deliberate, and every inch forward a testament to experience over ego. Jason's mind raced. He had expected to crush the challenge, to demonstrate the superiority of wealth, technology, and speed. Instead, he found himself a passenger, unable to change the outcome, and forced to reckon with the fact that the Cadillac and its driver were outperforming him in every meaningful way. The crowd's reactions were a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some whispered about the mechanical failure of the Ferrari, some chuckled nervously, and others simply stared, captivated by the unexpected reversal of roles. For once, Jason's ego had been humbled publicly, and the lesson was being documented for all to see. Henry's movements were deliberate yet unassuming. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, and didn't comment on Jason's predicament. The Cadillac moved with the steady hum of control, a gentle counterpoint to the chaos that had consumed the Ferrari. Employees and bystanders were mesmerized by the contrast. Some muttered quietly, "He's so calm, it's like nothing can shake him." Others captured every second on their phones, knowing this moment would be shared widely within the company and beyond. The scene was not just about a race, it had become a demonstration of character, humility, and expertise. Henry's approach reminded everyone that true power was often understated, earned, and consistent. As the Cadillac approached the finish line, Jason felt a strange combination of relief and embarrassment. Relief because the ride was smooth and safe, embarrassment because he had been publicly outperformed by a man he had long overlooked. Henry guided the car across the finish line without a hint of urgency. The Cadillac's slow, steady approach highlighted the stark difference between rushing to assert dominance and moving with assured purpose. Employees erupted into applause, laughter, and astonished chatter. Some raised their phones higher, capturing the symbolic moment of the wealthy CEO riding as a passenger in the janitor's car. The lesson was clear and profound. Arrogance could be dismantled by quiet competence. Jason exhaled slowly, trying to reconcile his emotions. The humiliation of being overtaken in what should have been an easy victory weighed heavily on him. The crowd, sensing his defeat, whispered, filmed, and reacted in a mixture of awe and disbelief. Investors, employees, and onlookers were captivated not by the speed of the vehicles but by the unexpected lesson in leadership and humility. Jason had always believed that his wealth and power defined him, but in that moment, he realized that skill, patience, and character could surpass even the most aggressive displays of dominance. Henry eased the Cadillac to a stop, stepping out with the calm confidence that had carried him through the entire encounter. Jason followed, his posture slightly slouched, his pride dented but still intact. The employees who had gathered around the finish line murmured, whispering about the spectacle they had just witnessed. Phones captured every expression, every subtle gesture, every second of the unlikely outcome. Henry's demeanor remained measured, his actions deliberate yet understated. He had achieved victory not through aggression or arrogance, but through consistent, patient mastery. Jason looked around at the crowd. The realization hit him fully: the narrative had changed. He had planned to showcase dominance, but instead, he had been taught a lesson about humility. Employees, previously deferential, now looked at Henry with respect, admiration, and a newfound awareness of the value of experience and consistency. Some whispered, "This is incredible. He didn't need to fight to prove himself." Others captured the moment on video, recognizing that it would become part of company lore. Henry's approach, calm and measured, had shifted the power dynamic entirely. Henry approached Jason with a small nod, a subtle gesture acknowledging the shared experience. "I didn't race for your company," he said quietly, addressing Jason directly. "I raced because you asked. I wanted to finish what you started, not take anything from you." The words resonated across the parking lot. Employees and investors alike absorbed the meaning, understanding that the lesson was not just about cars or competition, but about respect, patience, and character. Jason, still recovering from the shock of defeat, absorbed the magnitude of Henry's humility and restraint. The surrounding crowd, sensing the completion of the event, began disperses slowly, many still whispering, filming, and discussing the incredible sequence they had just witnessed. Jason's Ferrari remained inoperative, a reminder of the limits of speed and ego, while the Cadillac, under Henry's control, had crossed the finish line with quiet authority. The symbolism was undeniable: patience, mastery, and consistency could overcome arrogance, flashiness, and brute force. Henry had demonstrated that leadership and respect were earned through skill and composure, not through status or intimidation. By the time Jason and Henry walked back toward the center of the lot, the employees had begun replaying the events, debating every detail, and marveling at the unexpected outcome. Investors who had gathered to witness the spectacle exchanged glances, realizing that the lesson extended beyond the race itself. It was a lesson in leadership, character, and the unexpected ways influence could be demonstrated. Jason, reflecting on the events, understood that he had been humbled in a way that no boardroom discussion or financial report could have accomplished. Henry checked the Cadillac one final time, ensuring everything was in order, then stepped back. His demeanor remained calm, measured, and composed. Employees approached him, offering quiet congratulations. Jason stood beside him, still processing the humbling experience, and the employees recognized a shift in the hierarchy not based on wealth or speed, but on integrity, skill, and patience. The parking lot, once a stage for ego and dominance, had become a classroom in humility and mastery, with Henry Johnson as the unassuming teacher. The moment the Cadillac crossed the finish line, a new energy swept through the company parking lot. Employees were buzzing, phones capturing every second of the unexpected turn of events. replaying the sequence in their minds even before they stepped back inside the building. Jason Carter sat as a passenger, trying to reconcile the humbling experience he had just endured. The pride he had carried into the morning now weighed heavily on his shoulders. Every step, every gesture, every confident smirk had been dismantled by a combination of patience, skill, and quiet determination embodied in Henry Johnson and his aged Cadillac. The narrative had shifted. What was supposed to be Jason's moment of dominance had become a powerful lesson in humility, leadership, and respect. Employees started drifting closer to the two cars, murmuring excitedly, still processing what they had witnessed. Phones recorded every subtle movement, every exchange between Jason and Henry, every reaction from the crowd. Some employees whispered to one another about the skill and composure Henry had demonstrated, realizing that the man they had often overlooked had just stolen the spotlight. Henry didn't gloat or celebrate. He stepped out of the Cadillac and stretched his legs, rubbing his knees slightly, carrying himself as though he had simply completed a routine day at work. The contrast between his measured composure and Jason's flustered, embarrassed state was stark and striking. Jason climbed out of the passenger seat of the Cadillac, his face pale and sweaty, shirt clinging to his back. He tried to adjust his posture, to regain a shred of dignity, but the weight of the crowd's attention pressed heavily upon him. Investors and board members who had gathered were observing intently, their expressions a mix of concern and judgment. The reality was unavoidable. Jason's behavior earlier in the day, mocking an employee, turning a simple parking dispute into a public spectacle, was no longer just a moment of embarrassment. It was a tangible reflection of leadership and character under pressure. Whispers floated among employees. He lost in his own challenge, one said. The CEO had to ride with the janitor, another murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. Henry approached Jason calmly, giving him a slight nod as if acknowledging the shared experience without making a spectacle out of it. I didn't race for your company, he said, clearly, voice steady. I raced because you asked. I wanted to finish what you started, not take anything from you. The words cut through the ambient chatter, and employees paused to absorb the significance. There was no triumphalism, no gloating, only honesty and professionalism. The crowd recognized it immediately. This was not about winning a race, it was about character and integrity, and Henry had demonstrated both in a way that demanded respect. Jason looked around, searching for a response, some way to regain authority, but he found none. The board's chairwoman stepped forward, her expression serious yet controlled. Jason, your actions today reflect poorly on the company, she said, her tone calm but firm. Dragging employees into a public spectacle, mocking someone in front of the crowd, and creating a scene does not align with the leadership standards we uphold. Jason's shoulders slumped further, every word sinking like a weight. The humiliation was compounded by the recognition that this was not just a private lesson but a public one, recorded and shared, witnessed by investors, employees, and possibly the wider business community. Employees began discussing the event among themselves, still processing what had occurred. Some laughed quietly at the absurdity, others shook their heads in disbelief, and a few nodded in quiet admiration for Henry's approach. Henry, however, remained steady, moving to check on his Cadillac, brushing dust from the seat, ensuring everything was as it should be. Employees approached him one by one, offering congratulations, soft smiles, and words of respect. You kept your cool, sir, Respect, one said. Henry responded with a simple nod. Didn't need more than that, he replied. His focus had never been on glory or recognition. It had been on finishing the challenge with precision and integrity, a lesson that resonated far beyond the parking lot. Meanwhile, Jason faced the reality of the consequences. Investors and board members conferred quietly, their murmurs audible to the surrounding employees. Discussions about leadership review, potential suspension, and company image circulated as quietly as possible, but everyone could feel the tension. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. Jason's control, previously absolute, had been questioned in front of the very people whose support had maintained his position. It was a humbling, transformative moment that made clear the difference between arrogance and genuine leadership. Employees, witnessing the shift, began reconsidering their perceptions of authority, respect, and what it truly meant to lead effectively. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, the lesson lingered. Phones captured the Cadillac pulling away, Henry driving with calm precision, Jason still riding as a passenger, silently reflecting on the events. Social media would soon replay the scene, but within the company, the impact was already evident. Employees discussed the importance of humility, patience, and competence over aggression and pride. Henry had demonstrated that true respect is earned through character focus and the ability to navigate challenges without arrogance or need for showmanship. The ripple effect was immediate. Conversations shifted, attitudes adjusted, and the culture of the company subtly began to realign around the example set by Henry. Henry, driving through the company's parking lot, allowed himself a small exhale. He had not sought recognition, but the acknowledgement of his peers and the implicit respect from the board were undeniable. Every careful movement of the Cadillac had reinforced the lesson that mastery and patience could surpass even the loudest displays of wealth and power. Employees who approached him still talked quietly, sharing admiration and processing the spectacle they had witnessed. The lessons of the morning were simple, yet profound. Arrogance could falter, patience and expertise endure, and leadership required more than dominance, it demanded character. Jason, now fully aware of the implications, sat in the passenger seat absorbing the weight of the day. The humiliation had been public, undeniable, and unavoidable. The lesson was stark. True authority did not always come from speed, wealth, or power. It came from consistency, patience, and respect for others. The board members' silent approval of Henry's conduct reinforced this message. The contrast between the two men could not have been clearer. Jason's display of ego had collapsed in the face of a quiet, patient mastery that demanded attention without seeking it. Employees, investors, and bystanders all understood that the hierarchy of the parking lot and perhaps the company itself had shifted in subtle but lasting ways. As Henry pulled away, leaving the lot behind, the employees slowly returned to their routines, but the conversation about what had transpired persisted. Laughter, astonishment, admiration, and reflection intermingled in hushed tones throughout the office. The videos captured on phones circulated quickly, replayed in quiet corners, shared with those who weren't present, and used as lessons in leadership, patience, and character. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Jason, despite his wealth and position, had learned a lesson that would shape his approach, at least for now. While the employees absorbed an even larger one of humility, expertise, and quiet confidence could triumph over the loudest displays of power. By the end of the day, the story of the race had become a defining narrative. Henry Johnson, the unassuming janitor with the 1930 Cadillac, had written the rules of respect, authority, and influence in the company. Jason Carter had experienced a humbling reckoning that no amount of wealth or status could erase. The parking lot, once a stage for dominance, had transformed into a classroom for the entire company, teaching lessons about character, leadership, and the enduring value of patience and mastery. Every employee carried the memory forward, and the story would be retold countless times. The day the janitor won a race against the CEO, not by power or speed but by focus, skill, and integrity. The day after the race, the company felt different. Hallways that had once echoed with routine chatter now hummed with discussion about the events in the parking lot. Employees gathered in small clusters, replaying videos on their phones, debating every detail, and sharing theories about what had really happened. Henry Johnson moved through the office as usual, performing his duties with the same steady focus he always had. But now he walked with a quiet respect that everyone could sense. People who had once overlooked him paused to nod, to smile, or to offer congratulations. The narrative of the previous day had reshaped the company's culture, if only subtly. Authority was no longer measured solely by title, wealth, or showmanship. Jason Carter arrived at the office that morning, Ferrari absent, replaced by a modest company car. The contrast was not lost on the employees. The memory of the sleek red vehicle juxtaposed against Henry's Cadillac lingered in everyone's mind. Jason walked through the corridors, and the reactions were noticeably different. There were fewer deferential glances, fewer immediate attempts to curry favor. He had been humbled publicly, and the employees' perception of him had shifted. Every step he took was measured, his posture slightly less aggressive, his usual air of dominance tempered by the memory of the previous day. Even his assistant noticed the change, quietly remarking that Jason seemed different, more cautious. Henry continued his daily routine, but people sought him out more often than before. Employees who had once ignored his presence now engaged him in conversation, asking questions about the race, the Cadillac, and his approach to handling challenges. Henry answered with patience and professionalism, never boasting, never diminishing anyone else, only sharing insights when asked. His demeanor became a subtle teaching tool. The lessons were not delivered through lectures, but through example, patience, and quiet confidence. Every interaction Henry had reinforced the idea that skill, patience, and character were more enduring than status or wealth. Jason, meanwhile, spent the morning reflecting on the lessons he had learned, replaying the race and its aftermath in his mind. He had always believed that success was measured by dominance, speed, and public display, but the events of the previous day challenged those assumptions. The humiliation he had experienced was compounded by the respect that Henry now commanded effortlessly. Jason understood more clearly than ever that authority without respect was fragile. The employees' reactions, the murmurs in the hallways, and the subtle shifts in demeanor all reminded him that leadership was more complex than he had ever appreciated. Meetings that day carried an unusual tension. Investors and board members referenced the race, consciously or not, in discussions about company culture and leadership. Jason had to defend his decisions, explain his behavior, and navigate the perceptions created by a public display of humility. He realized that power, unchecked, could backfire spectacularly. The lesson was undeniable: respect was earned, not demanded, and patience and skill often outweighed brute force or showmanship. Every conversation reminded him that he had been challenged in a way no negotiation, presentation, or financial decision had ever done. Henry's influence spread quietly but steadily. Employees began applying the lessons they had observed in the parking lot to their own interactions. Patience in handling tasks, measured responses to stress, and focus on skill over ego became subtle trends throughout the office. The company's culture, often criticized as overly competitive and aggressive, started to shift. Small acts of respect and acknowledgement became more common. The story of the race was shared in casual meetings over coffee and during lunch breaks. It became more than entertainment; it was a model of professionalism and character under pressure. Jason felt the weight of this cultural shift keenly. He recognized that his previous leadership style, reliant on fear, intimidation, and spectacle, was no longer effective. Employees who once sought his approval now measured him against the quiet competence of Henry. Every decision he made, every interaction he had, was observed through the lens of what had transpired in the parking lot. Jason had to reconsider not just his behavior, but his approach to leadership, communication, and respect. The race had become a turning point, a benchmark against which future conduct would be measured. Henry's Cadillac, once mocked as a relic, now symbolized endurance, skill, and quiet strength. Employees often referenced the car in conversations about perseverance and preparation. It was no longer just a vehicle. It was a metaphor for consistent, reliable performance that could outperform flashiness and arrogance. Henry's example reminded everyone that the simplest, most consistent actions often held the greatest power. Jason himself could not ignore this lesson. Every encounter, every task, every interaction reinforced the idea that humility and mastery could outweigh wealth and intimidation. By mid-morning, small groups of employees had begun to reorganize around new priorities inspired by Henry's example. Mentorship, collaboration, and recognition of skill became subtle hallmarks of the day. Those who had been focused on status and performance metrics were now reflecting on consistency, patience, and competence. Even in casual conversations, employees referenced the race and its outcomes, discussing strategy, preparation, and measured execution. The ripple effect was tangible. A culture that had long prized spectacle and dominance was beginning to value character and skill. Jason observed all of this from his office, notebook open but mind distracted. He watched as employees approached Henry, asked questions, shared small moments of gratitude, and laughed at stories about the race. Jason realized that the story had grown beyond the lot, beyond the vehicles, and into the very fabric of the company. Leadership was no longer just about titles, compensation, or recognition. It was about respect, patience, and the ability to demonstrate mastery in a way that others could learn from and emulate. Jason reflected on how much he had taken for granted, how often he had assumed his status guaranteed admiration, and how little he had valued the quiet competence of those around him. By the end of the day, the narrative of the race had spread to every corner of the office. Employees shared their own interpretations, discussed lessons, and began to incorporate subtle changes into their work. Meetings started with acknowledgments of contributions rather than displays of ego. Teams began approaching challenges with patience and methodical planning. Henry's example had become a standard for behavior, professionalism, and influence. Jason, walking through the office, felt a mixture of humility, respect, and cautious admiration. The CEO had been humbled, and the janitor had become an unspoken model of leadership and character. Henry, wrapping up his day, returned to his Cadillac. He had done no more than complete a task with precision, patience, and professionalism, yet the impact of his actions had been extraordinary. Employees stopped to greet him, offer thanks, and share reflections on the lesson he had provided. Henry responded with the same calm composure he had exhibited during the race. He didn't gloat, he didn't seek recognition, he simply acknowledged the interaction and continued with his day. The quiet strength he embodied contrasted sharply with the chaos and spectacle that Jason had relied on, reinforcing the idea that influence and respect were earned, not demanded. As the sun set, Jason reviewed the events of the day. He realized that the race had been more than a lesson about vehicles, speed, or public spectacle. It had been a lesson about leadership, culture, and human behavior. Wealth and power were fleeting if not balanced by respect, patience, and integrity. The employees had internalized the lesson, subtly reshaping the company culture around values that had previously been overlooked. Jason recognized that his journey as a leader had changed irrevocably. and he carried with him the understanding that true authority is grounded in consistent action, humility, and skill. By the time everyone left the office, the story of the race had already begun to take on a life of its own. It was retold in meetings, whispered in hallways, replayed on phones, and shared among friends and family. Henry Johnson's quiet strength and measured actions had left an indelible mark, transforming the way the company viewed authority, respect, and leadership. Jason Carter had been humbled, the employees had been inspired, and the culture of the company had begun a subtle but irreversible shift. The Cadillac, the janitor, and the unexpected race had become more than a story. They had become a symbol of enduring lessons about character, mastery, and the quiet power of doing things right. The morning after the race, the atmosphere in the company was electric, charged with stories of the previous day's events. Employees trickled into the office with smiles, phones in hand, replaying the videos of the Cadillac crossing the finish line while Jason Carter, the CEO, rode as a passenger. Conversations hummed with disbelief, admiration, and humor, but there was an underlying current of reflection. People weren't just talking about cars or a race, they were talking about character, patience, and the subtle demonstration of respect and mastery. The narrative had shifted and Henry Johnson had become an unspoken hero. Henry moved through the office as he always had, performing his duties with the same steady care and focus that had defined his career. Yet today he was met with nods, greetings, and subtle acknowledgments that had not been extended before. Employees who had previously brushed past him now paused to exchange a word or offer congratulations. His example had silently changed the way people perceived authority and competence. In every corridor, someone remarked on his patience, his skill, and the quiet control he had demonstrated during the race. The Cadillac, once mocked, had become a symbol of resilience and mastery, a vehicle that embodied the lessons Henry had imparted without speaking a single boastful word. Jason, however, walked through the office carrying the weight of the previous day. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tentative awareness of how much he had underestimated Henry and the lessons embedded in that race. The CEO had entered the day with confidence, expecting to dominate and demonstrate superiority, but now he was navigating the subtle currents of employee respect that had shifted under his feet. Investors and board members had already begun their quiet conversations, discussing the implications for leadership and culture. Jason had to confront the reality that a simple race had upended the perceptions of the employees and exposed vulnerabilities he had long ignored. In the break room, small groups of employees gathered, replaying videos on laptops and phones, dissecting every move Henry had made, every adjustment of the Cadillac, and every reaction from Jason. They discussed strategy, focus, and patience as though analyzing a business plan rather than a race. Henry's approach had become a blueprint for decision-making, illustrating the power of consistency and preparation over flashy displays and aggression. Each conversation reinforced the lesson that skill and composure often outweighed status and intimidation. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves drawn to the example of Henry's calm, methodical approach. Henry's influence extended beyond the immediate reactions. Employees began emulating his behavior in small but meaningful ways. Teams approached projects with more careful planning, valuing methodical execution over speed alone. Mentorship became more deliberate, with employees taking the time to guide and support one another rather than seeking attention or recognition. Henry's example had set a new standard for behavior, subtly reshaping company culture. Leadership was no longer about who could assert dominance most effectively. It was about who could demonstrate patience, skill, and integrity consistently. Jason, in the meantime, was forced to confront his own actions. The board requested a meeting to discuss the public nature of his behavior, the risk to the company's reputation, and the implications for employee morale. Jason realized that his ego, once a shield of confidence and authority, had left him exposed in a way he had not anticipated. The humiliation of being outperformed in a public display had been compounded by the employees' visible admiration for Henry. He understood that true leadership required more than status, wealth, or spectacle. It required respect earned through competence, character, and consistency. Henry remained a constant example throughout the day. Employees sought his advice on routine tasks, problem-solving, and even personal challenges. He responded patiently, offering guidance without condescension, reinforcing the subtle lessons from the race. Each interaction strengthened the notion that mastery and respect were earned, not demanded. The employees' perceptions had shifted. The unassuming janitor had become a benchmark for behavior, and his example influenced interactions across the company. Collaboration and patience began to replace impulsive decisions and aggressive competition. Jason's attempts to reclaim authority were met with a subtle but undeniable resistance. Employees who had previously deferred now engaged with him differently, seeking dialogue rather than approval. They tested his humility, watched his responses, and measured his ability to learn from the previous day's lesson. For the first time, Jason realized that influence was not unilateral. True leadership required listening, acknowledging, and adapting. The contrast between his aggressive style and Henry's measured approach became a constant reminder that character and competence could surpass status and wealth. Meetings that day were different. Discussions about projects and strategy now included references to the race, Henry's composure, and the power of consistent, thoughtful execution. Employees referenced the Cadillac as a metaphor for steady progress and the importance of preparation and skill. Jason found himself listening more than talking, reflecting on the implications of every decision he made. The race had provided more than entertainment. It had offered a lesson in leadership, human behavior, and the long-term impact of patience and respect. Henry's example even began to influence new initiatives. Projects were approached with greater care, deadlines were respected with realism rather than pressure alone, and mentorship became more structured. The subtle shift in culture was evident in interactions, task completion, and the overall mood of the office. Employees began to internalize the lessons from the race, recognizing that competence and character could inspire far more than wealth or authority alone. The story of the race was repeated in meetings, over coffee, and during informal gatherings, embedding its message throughout the organization. Jason's reflection deepened as he observed these changes. He understood that his behavior had created a vulnerability, a moment of exposure that Henry had used not to dominate but to teach. The lesson was profound. Leadership was not about spectacle or intimidation, and it was about earning respect through consistent, skillful, and patient action. Jason recognized that rebuilding authority required humility, reflection, and adaptation. The race had revealed weaknesses, but it also offered a blueprint for transformation. By the end of the day, the story of the race had solidified in the collective consciousness of the company. Employees had shared their interpretations, extracted lessons, and begun applying them to their work. The influence of Henry's example was pervasive, affecting decisions, attitudes, and interactions at every level. Even those who had once dismissed him now acknowledged his wisdom and skill. The culture of the company had shifted subtly but irreversibly, prioritizing patience, consistency, and integrity over spectacle, aggression, and ego. Henry, finishing his day, returned to his Cadillac and prepared to leave. Employees stopped to offer thanks, congratulations, and reflections on the impact of his actions. He accepted the acknowledgments with modesty, reinforcing the lesson that recognition was secondary to skill and integrity. The Cadillac, once a symbol of neglect, had become a representation of mastery, patience, and quiet power. Its hum through the parking lot echoed the subtle shift in company culture, a reminder that true influence comes from consistent action and respect rather than flashiness or dominance. Jason, walking back to his office after the board meeting, reflected on the events of the past 2 days. The humiliation had been public, undeniable, and deeply instructive. He realized that authority alone could not inspire loyalty or admiration. Leadership required a combination of humility, respect, competence, and patience, qualities he had witnessed embodied in Henry Johnson. The race had become more than an anecdote. It had become a benchmark for behavior, a lesson that would guide the company's culture and his own approach to leadership in the future. As the sun set over the Silicon Valley skyline, the employees left the office carrying with them the story of the race, the example of Henry and the lessons in patience, consistency, and integrity. The Cadillac, the unassuming janitor, and the humbled CEO had created a narrative that would be shared, remembered, and internalized for years to come. Leadership, influence, and respect had been redefined not by spectacle or wealth, but by character, skill, and the quiet mastery of action under pressure. News of the race spread beyond the company's walls faster than anyone could have anticipated. Social media clips went viral, capturing the surreal scene of Jason Carter, the CEO of a prominent Silicon Valley tech firm, being carried across the finish line by Henry Johnson, the unassuming janitor with a 1930 Cadillac. The story was shared across platforms, with headlines emphasizing the improbable defeat of a millionaire by a janitor in a classic car. The public reaction was a mix of awe, amusement, and admiration, and soon reporters were reaching out to the company for statements. Within hours, the race became a case study in humility, leadership, and character that was discussed across offices, classrooms, and online communities nationwide. Jason Carter's inbox filled with emails, messages, and calls from investors, clients, and colleagues. Some messages were supportive, acknowledging the lesson in humility, while others expressed concern about the company's public image. For Jason, the experience was both humiliating and enlightening. He realized that his display of arrogance had been recorded for the world to see, and that the narrative had shifted dramatically from one of dominance to one of humility, patience, and unexpected mentorship. The Ferrari, once a symbol of his superiority, had been eclipsed by the Cadillac's steady progress and Henry's quiet composure. The media began to frame the event not as a simple parking lot incident, but as a story about leadership, respect, and the unexpected lessons that can arise from everyday interactions. Journalists praised Henry's patience, skill, and character, portraying him as an exemplar of quiet power and resilience. Articles discussed how true influence often comes from competence and consistency rather than wealth or flashy displays. The race became a talking point in leadership seminars, business courses, and management workshops, highlighting the importance of humility, preparation, and respect in professional settings. Henry had unwittingly become a national symbol of character-driven success. Inside the company, the viral attention intensified the cultural shift that had already begun. Employees who had witnessed the race firsthand felt a renewed sense of empowerment, seeing how patience and mastery could command respect in a way that title or wealth could not. Meetings now included subtle nods to the lessons learned from Henry's approach, the value of preparation, the importance of measured responses, and the power of focus and consistency. Employees felt motivated not by fear of authority but by admiration for the quiet example Henry had set, reinforcing a new standard for behavior and performance. Jason faced external pressure as well. Clients and investors called, curious or concerned about the public perception of leadership within the company. Jason had to explain the situation carefully, framing the story in terms of learning growth and cultural reflection rather than embarrassment. Every conversation reinforced the reality that the race had changed perceptions and that leadership required more than wealth, status, or public spectacle. He realized that the story of Henry's calm competence and mastery would shape the company's image far longer than any press release or marketing campaign ever could. Henry, on the other hand, remained grounded. Interviews with reporters, when requested, were brief and measured. He emphasized that the race had not been about taking power or asserting superiority, but about completing a challenge with focus, skill, and integrity. Every answer he gave reinforced the lessons of humility, patience, and competence. The public admired not just the story of the race, but Henry's demeanor throughout the aftermath. He became a role model, demonstrating that true leadership is often exercised through quiet mastery rather than aggressive display. The CEO's reaction to the media attention was closely watched. Jason had to navigate the delicate balance between acknowledging the lesson and maintaining authority within his organization. Each public statement, every interview had to reflect humility while also demonstrating that the company remained stable and professional. The contrast between Jason's earlier arrogance and the measured tone required by the media underscored the lesson that influence and respect must be earned, not simply assumed. Employees and the broader public watched his responses, measuring his capacity for growth and adaptation in the wake of an unexpected challenge. The viral nature of the story also inspired other companies and leaders. Social media discussions debated the implications for corporate culture, leadership practices, and the treatment of employees. Management consultants and leadership coaches highlighted the race as an example of how humility, preparation, and respect can outperform ego and wealth. Articles and posts emphasized that even in high-pressure, high-status environments, consistent skill and character carry a power that status alone cannot match. Henry's example became a model cited repeatedly in discussions of leadership, workplace culture, and employee engagement. Employees within the company began referencing Henry's approach in their work. Subtle shifts in communication, project management, and decision-making were observed, reflecting the lessons learned from the race. Collaboration became more deliberate, patience more common, and recognition of competence more widely shared. The viral story had transformed from entertainment into a tool for cultural change, guiding behavior and expectations within the company. Even Jason had to acknowledge that the lesson had reshaped the organizational landscape, emphasizing the power of skill and integrity over arrogance and spectacle. External media coverage also highlighted the contrast between Jason's Ferrari and Henry's Cadillac. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. The flashy, expensive, high-powered car represented arrogance and unearned authority, while the slow, steady, reliable Cadillac embodied patience, mastery, and quiet competence. The story resonated beyond Silicon Valley, reaching classrooms, leadership seminars, and professional networks, inspiring discussions about the dynamics of influence, respect, and character. Henry became a symbol not of wealth, but of enduring personal mastery and the kind of quiet leadership that commands respect. As the company navigated the aftermath, internal and external perspectives aligned. Employees were inspired, investors were cautiously impressed, and clients were intrigued by the cultural lessons that had emerged. The story of the race had become a narrative about the unexpected ways influence can manifest, about the power of patience and skill, and about the importance of humility in leadership. Jason, reflecting on the intense media coverage and its implications, realized that the event had transformed not only public perception but also his personal understanding of leadership. By the end of the week, the story had fully permeated both internal and external networks. Videos were replayed, articles shared, and discussions held in offices across the country. Employees continued to reference the race in meetings, using it as a reminder of patience, preparation, and integrity. Henry's example had become a benchmark for behavior, a quiet standard of excellence that contrasted sharply with the earlier emphasis on showmanship and status. The Cadillac, the janitor, and the humbled CEO had created a narrative that would endure, teaching lessons about leadership, respect, and the enduring power of quiet mastery. Jason Carter, still processing the lessons, began adjusting his leadership style. He held meetings differently, listened more attentively, and emphasized competence over appearances. He engaged employees with newfound respect, aware that the events had permanently shifted the cultural dynamics within the company. The media's attention had amplified the lesson, ensuring that Henry's example was recognized widely and celebrated not just as a story of a race, but as a profound demonstration of character, skill, and patience. Henry Johnson, quietly returning to his routine, remained a constant symbol of what the story had taught the company. His actions had reshaped perceptions of authority, competence, and respect. Employees, inspired and motivated, integrated these lessons into their daily work, creating a lasting impact on the company's culture. The story of the race, now a viral sensation, had proven that leadership is defined not by wealth, status, or spectacle, but by the quiet, consistent demonstration of skill, patience, and character, a lesson that would resonate long after the cameras stopped recording. After the media frenzy surrounding the race, Jason Carter found himself facing a series of private meetings that he could no longer avoid. Board members, investors, and senior executives requested time to discuss the implications of the viral story, emphasizing concerns about leadership credibility, company culture, and public perception. Jason entered the first meeting with a mixture of apprehension and determination. The Ferrari was gone, replaced by his company-issued car, a subtle reminder that the ostentation of the previous day had been stripped away. Every glance from the board and investors carried a weight he hadn't felt in years, a combination of scrutiny and expectation. The boardroom was tense, with Jason seated at the head of the table. Investors leaned forward, papers shuffled, laptops open, and eyes sharp. The discussion began with a recap of the events, framed not as entertainment but as a critical examination of leadership. Board members questioned Jason's judgment, the tone of his communications, and the decision to challenge an employee publicly. Each comment forced him to reflect on the arrogance that had led to the race in the first place. Jason listened, occasionally interjecting, but he realized that defending himself through ego alone was futile. The lesson Henry had taught in the parking lot was now being reinforced by the very people who shaped the company's future. Investors expressed concern about the optics. Jason began, voice firm, "This viral story raises serious questions about leadership style and professionalism. How we respond internally and externally will impact investor confidence." Jason nodded, acknowledging the point. He understood that the events had far-reaching consequences beyond a single parking lot or race. It was about corporate reputation, employee trust, and the broader image of the company as a professional, responsible organization. The lesson was clear: leadership could no longer be defined by spectacle, but by consistent action, humility, and integrity. Board members then shifted the conversation to culture. They noted that the viral attention had highlighted the contrast between Jason's approach to leadership and Henry's quiet mastery. "Employees have been inspired by Henry's conduct," another board member commented. "They see competence, patience, and character rewarded. This is a powerful message for the company, but it also underscores areas where leadership must adapt." Jason felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. Pride that the company's employees had learned a lesson in character, discomfort that his actions had served as the catalyst. He began to realize that the influence of a leader was measured less by intimidation and more by example and integrity. Jason took a deep breath and began to speak more candidly. He admitted that his behavior had been driven by ego, by a desire to assert dominance, and by a lack of perspective on the value of patience and skill. He acknowledged that the outcome had been both humbling and instructive, and that he intended to incorporate the lessons into his leadership style going forward. The room responded with a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. The CEO's acknowledgement of vulnerability was unusual, yet it signaled a willingness to learn and adapt, a key factor in restoring confidence among employees and investors alike. Senior executives discussed how to manage the company's internal and external communications. The consensus was that the story should be framed as a lesson in leadership and corporate culture, highlighting the positive example set by Henry while acknowledging Jason's growth and reflection. Press releases, internal memos, and social media posts were drafted to reinforce the narrative that competence, patience, and integrity were valued over arrogance and spectacle. Jason agreed to participate in interviews, emphasizing the importance of character-driven leadership and the unexpected insights gained from the race. The messaging aimed to transform what could have been a disaster into a catalyst for cultural reinforcement and corporate identity. During the meeting, Jason also reflected on the internal impact of the race. Employees were already modeling behavior inspired by Henry's example. Collaboration, patience, and acknowledgement of skill were replacing impulsive decision-making in competition for attention. Jason realized that the race had unintentionally shifted the company's culture, creating an environment where respect and mastery were celebrated. This realization brought both relief and responsibility. Leadership required him not only to acknowledge the lesson but to actively support and sustain the cultural shift that had begun organically. The conversation turned to performance metrics and evaluation. Board members suggested incorporating values of patience, consistency, and mentorship into performance reviews and employee assessments. Jason recognized that this approach would help reinforce the lessons learned from the race and encourage behaviors aligned with Henry's example. Employees would be rewarded for collaboration, focus, and the demonstration of skill and integrity, not just for speed, visibility, or aggressive competition. The shift in priorities marked a fundamental change in how the company would define success and leadership going forward. Jason also had to confront his personal accountability. The board stressed that public perception was as important as internal culture. The CEO's reaction to Henry's quiet mastery had been documented and analyzed extensively. Jason understood that his credibility was tied not to wealth or position but to his capacity to demonstrate growth, humility, and respect. He committed to attending leadership development sessions, engaging with employees in meaningful ways, and ensuring that his actions aligned with the values now being reinforced company-wide. The lesson from the parking lot had extended far beyond that moment. It had become a blueprint for personal and corporate development. Investors acknowledged that the race, while initially a prior risk, had provided an unexpected benefit. The narrative of character triumphing over arrogance resonated broadly, reinforcing the company's brand in ways that traditional marketing or corporate initiatives could not. Jason was tasked with leveraging this momentum to strengthen both internal cohesion and public perception. The race had become a teaching tool, a cultural touchstone, and a benchmark for leadership that extended beyond the immediate team to the entire organization. By the end of the meetings, Jason felt a mix of exhaustion, humility, and resolve. He had been forced to confront his own limitations, acknowledge mistakes, and consider the broader implications of leadership beyond ego and spectacle. The lessons Henry had demonstrated so quietly during the race now became integral to the company's strategy, culture, and public identity. Jason understood that the CEO's role was not merely to direct, but to embody values, model behavior, and cultivate respect. The race had redefined what it meant to lead not through fear or power, but through patience, integrity, and consistent mastery. As the week progressed, Jason implemented changes that reflected his new perspective. He held meetings differently, listened more attentively, and recognized employees for skill and effort rather than mere visibility or compliance. Projects were approached with an emphasis on planning, patience, and execution, and mentorship became a key component of the company's operational framework. Employees responded positively, reinforcing the cultural shift initiated by Henry's quiet example. The lessons from the race had permeated every level of the organization, reshaping norms, behaviors, and expectations in profound ways. Henry continued his daily routine, largely unaffected by the external attention, but his example now carried extraordinary weight. Employees approached him for guidance, not because of his position, but because of the respect he had earned through skill, patience, and composure. His calm mastery became a model for behavior, influencing interactions, decision-making, and leadership across the company. The Cadillac, once overlooked, now symbolized endurance, integrity, and the enduring power of quiet competence. By the end of the week, the race and its lessons had fully integrated into the company's narrative. Employees discussed it in meetings, shared it in casual conversations, and internalized the principles demonstrated by Henry. Jason, having faced his own vulnerability and learned from the experience, began a deliberate transformation in leadership style. The company culture, previously dominated by spectacle and ego, now valued patience, mastery, and integrity, lessons that would guide behavior for years to come. The story of the race, the CEO's humility, and the janitor's quiet competence had created a powerful, enduring blueprint for leadership and character. Weeks after the race, the ripple effects continued to shape the company in ways no one could have predicted. Employees carried the lessons of patience, consistency, and character into every project, meeting, and interaction. The story of Henry Johnson and his 1930 Cadillac had become part of the company's identity, a touchstone for behavior and expectations. It was more than a tale of an unlikely victory, it was a blueprint for how competence and integrity could redefine influence. Conversations across departments referenced the race, using it as a benchmark for decision-making and collaboration. Teams were more methodical, leaders more considerate, and employees more confident in demonstrating skill rather than relying on hierarchy alone. Jason Carter found himself reflecting daily on the implications of that singular morning in the parking lot. He had been humbled, forced to confront the fragility of ego, and compelled to rethink what leadership truly meant. His previous approach, relying on wealth, spectacle, and intimidation, had proven insufficient when confronted with patience and mastery. Jason began holding weekly discussions with team leads, emphasizing lessons he had learned not from business metrics or market performance, but from observing the calm, deliberate actions of Henry. He encouraged leaders to foster respect, patience, and integrity, setting a new standard for the organization. Henry continued his routine as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, but his presence carried newfound weight. Employees sought him out for advice, guidance, and perspective, recognizing that his calm approach and methodical execution were models worth emulating. Henry's humility amplified his influence, and he never sought recognition, yet every action reinforced the cultural shift he had catalyzed. The Cadillac, a simple vehicle with a steady hum, had become a metaphor for reliability, skill, and patience in a world obsessed with speed, power, and showmanship. Employees referred to it in discussions, drawing inspiration from its steady progress and Henry's quiet mastery. The story of the race reached business schools, leadership seminars, and online communities, sparking debates about the nature of authority, influence, and respect. Analysts highlighted the contrast between Jason's initial arrogance and Henry's composed approach, illustrating the timeless lesson that character, preparation, and skill often surpass status and spectacle. Leadership experts referenced the incident in case studies, emphasizing the enduring power of humility and consistent action over displays of wealth or intimidation. Henry unknowingly had become a symbol of an alternative model of influence, one based not on status, but on the consistent demonstration of competence and integrity. Internally, the company saw measurable changes. Collaboration increased, communication improved, and decision-making processes became more deliberate. Employees approached challenges with focus and care, valuing preparation and skill over rapid, attention-seeking actions. Mentorship became more structured, with experienced employees guiding others, reinforcing the lessons Henry had exemplified. Recognition shifted from mere visibility to the demonstration of mastery, effort, and integrity. The company culture, once dominated by spectacle and hierarchy, evolved into one that valued skill, patience, and character, values that Henry had embodied throughout the race. Jason himself continued to grow as a leader. He made a conscious effort to embody the principles demonstrated by Henry, emphasizing patience, listening, and careful decision-making in his daily leadership. The lessons from the parking lot had become personal guideposts, shaping his interactions, his expectations, and his understanding of influence. Jason acknowledged publicly and privately that true leadership required more than authority or wealth. It required earning respect through consistent, measured, and principled action. The race had not just humbled him, it had redefined how he led. Henry's influence extended beyond the company. His story inspired external leaders, consultants, and teams, demonstrating the profound impact of consistent action and patience over arrogance and power. Workshops and seminars used the incident to illustrate principles of leadership, emphasizing that true authority is grounded in competence and integrity. Henry became a symbol of how quiet mastery could command respect, influence culture, and shape organizational values without demanding attention or recognition. Within the company, milestones were now celebrated with attention to skill and effort rather than status or visibility. Projects that had previously been rushed to impress superiors were approached methodically, with planning, preparation, and collaboration prioritized. Leaders evaluated team members not just on speed or output, but on the quality, consistency, and integrity of their work. The race had become a lesson embedded into corporate DNA, reinforcing that leadership is measured not by spectacle, but by the ability to demonstrate skill, patience, and character consistently. Jason reflected on the broader implications of the race. Wealth, power, and status were fleeting. They could be challenged, undermined, or made irrelevant in a single unexpected moment. What endured was competence, patience, and integrity, qualities that could influence others, shape culture, and leave a lasting impact. Jason began mentoring younger leaders, emphasizing the lessons learned from Henry, ensuring that future generations of employees would understand that leadership was not about domination, but about example and character. The Cadillac became a quiet legend within the company. Employees who had witnessed the race shared the story with newcomers not just as entertainment, but as a foundational lesson. Training sessions incorporated references to the race, emphasizing the value of consistency, preparation, and humility. Henry's example encouraged employees to focus on what they could control: their skills, their patience, their integrity, rather than chasing status or recognition. The story became a touchstone for how to act under pressure, how to earn respect, and how to lead with quiet confidence. Months later, the race still resonated. Videos circulated, interviews were shared, and the story of Henry Johnson and Jason Carter continued to inspire reflection and discussion. The company culture had transformed, subtly but profoundly, with patience, mastery, and integrity as its core values. Employees carried the lessons into every interaction, creating a more collaborative, thoughtful, and resilient organization. Jason continued to evolve as a leader, guided by the principles he had observed and learned from Henry. The lesson of the race endured: character and competence outlasted ego and spectacle, shaping not only individual behavior but the culture of the entire company. The final image, one that remained in the minds of employees, investors, and external observers, was simple but powerful: a red Ferrari stalled in a parking lot, a steady black Cadillac crossing the finish line, and a janitor guiding the outcome with patience, skill, and integrity. That moment symbolized the transformation of leadership and culture, a story that would be told and retold as a reminder that true power is demonstrated through consistent action, humility, and the quiet mastery of one's craft. Henry Johnson's example had redefined success and influence, proving that even the unassuming can leave an indelible mark on the world. Months after the race, the company's culture had transformed in ways that few could have predicted. Henry Johnson's example had evolved from a single event into a lasting symbol of patience, mastery, and integrity. Employees now approached challenges with measured focus, prioritizing skill and preparation over quick victories or flashy displays. Meetings, which once often devolved into displays of hierarchy and competitiveness, now emphasized collaboration, mentorship, and thoughtful decision-making. The story of the Cadillac crossing the finish line while the CEO rode as a passenger had become a touchstone for behavior, a subtle but constant reminder that true influence and respect are earned through consistency and character. Jason Carter had undergone a profound transformation. The CEO who once relied on spectacle, intimidation, and displays of wealth to assert dominance now approached leadership with humility and attentiveness. He actively listened during meetings, sought input from employees at all levels, and acknowledged contributions with sincerity rather than expectation of deference. The race had taught him that authority alone was insufficient. Respect had to be earned, and it could be lost in an instant if arrogance or ego overshadowed competence. Jason's reflection and adaptation became a model for leadership within the company, demonstrating the value of learning from unexpected lessons. The company's external reputation also shifted. Media outlets that had once sensationalized the story now praised the organization for its cultural transformation. Analysts highlighted the shift from a down, ego-driven leadership model to a culture that valued patience, skill, and integrity. Clients and partners noted the company's renewed focus on consistency and thoughtful execution, commenting on improved communication, collaboration, and problem-solving across teams. The race, initially a viral spectacle, had become a defining moment in the company's narrative, illustrating how humility and character could influence organizational behavior and public perception simultaneously. Internally, employees embraced the lessons from Henry's example in tangible ways. Teams began structuring projects with greater care, planning timelines meticulously, and evaluating risks more thoughtfully. Mentorship programs flourished, with experienced employees guiding newer team members with patience and consistency, fostering skill development and a sense of shared responsibility. Recognition shifted from superficial displays or competition for visibility to acknowledgement of sustained effort, competence, and integrity. The Cadillac, once a relic, had become a metaphorical benchmark for resilience and thoughtful execution, inspiring employees to emulate its quiet persistence in their own work. Jason continued to integrate the lessons into his leadership style. He held workshops emphasizing the importance of patience, preparation, and respect in high-pressure environments. He encouraged employees to model behavior after Henry's example: steady, deliberate, and focused on long-term outcomes rather than immediate gratification. By publicly acknowledging the lessons learned from the race, Jason reinforced the message that humility, skill, and integrity were more enduring than spectacle or status. His approach signaled to employees, investors, and clients alike that leadership was about influence through example, not dominance through authority alone. Henry, despite becoming a symbol within the company and beyond, maintained his routine. He continued to perform his duties with the same meticulous care that had defined his career. Employees sought his guidance not for status, but for the insights he could offer about focus, preparation, and composure. Every interaction Henry had reinforced the cultural lessons of the race. He became a living benchmark for consistent mastery, showing that leadership and influence could emerge naturally from competence, patience, and integrity rather than position or power. The company's training programs began incorporating the story of the race and Henry's example as case studies. Leadership seminars emphasized decision-making under pressure, the value of preparation, and the importance of humility. New employees were introduced to the narrative as part of onboarding, ensuring that the lessons became ingrained from day one. Managers referenced the race in team meetings, using it to illustrate principles of consistency, respect, and character-driven influence. Henry's example became a touchstone, a framework for evaluating behavior and guiding professional development. Jason also recognized the broader societal impact of the story. The race had inspired discussions about leadership, humility, and character in classrooms, online forums, and professional networks. Analysts and leadership coaches cited it as an example of how influence is earned through consistent action and patience, rather than asserted through authority or wealth. Jason began participating in speaking engagements, highlighting the lessons learned and emphasizing that leadership requires humility, respect, and integrity, particularly in high-pressure, high-status environments. Within the company, the narrative reinforced teamwork and collaboration. Employees approached projects with an awareness that their actions reflected not only on themselves but also on the culture they were helping to shape. Competitiveness shifted from ego-driven rivalry to a constructive focus on achieving collective goals. Employees modeled behaviors after Henry, demonstrating patience, consistent effort, and respect for one another's contributions. Recognition programs were redesigned to celebrate sustained excellence and skill rather than flashy or superficial achievements. The story of the race became a blueprint for cultural cohesion and long-term success. Jason's leadership style continued to evolve. He implemented systems that prioritized mentorship, collaboration, and careful decision-making. He actively encouraged feedback and open dialogue, fostering an environment where employees felt empowered to contribute and grow. The lessons of the race guided policy changes, team evaluations, and management practices, embedding the principles of patience, mastery, and integrity into the fabric of the organization. Jason's personal growth mirrored the broader cultural shift, demonstrating that even leaders accustomed to dominance and spectacle could change when confronted with humility and exemplary behavior. The impact of Henry's actions also extended to clients and partners. They observed the company's transformed culture and responded positively, noting improvements in communication, reliability, and collaboration. The story of the race provided a narrative that reinforced the company's reputation for integrity and competence. It became clear that the lessons of patience, skill, and character were not only valuable internally but also served as a competitive advantage in external relationships, enhancing trust and credibility across the organization's network. As the months passed, the company continued to thrive under this new cultural paradigm. Employees were more engaged, leaders were more thoughtful, and collaboration had become the norm rather than the exception. The story of Henry Johnson and the 1930 Cadillac remained central, referenced in training sessions, meetings, and casual conversations alike. It served as a continuous reminder that leadership, influence, and respect are not derived from position, wealth, or spectacle, but from consistent, deliberate, and principled action. By the end of the year, the race had become legendary within the company. New hires were introduced to the narrative as a foundational story of culture, leadership, and personal conduct. Long-term employees reflected on the transformation it had inspired, recognizing how a single event had catalyzed enduring change. Jason continued to mentor emerging leaders, emphasizing the lessons of patience, preparation, and respect he had learned from observing Henry. The culture of the company had shifted permanently, guided by the quiet yet profound example of a man who had proven that true mastery and integrity could redefine influence in ways no title, car, or display of wealth ever could. Months after the race, Henry Johnson's influence continued to grow subtly but powerfully within the company. Employees no longer viewed him simply as the janitor who had once shocked the CEO. He had become a symbol of skill, patience, and integrity. His quiet mastery inspired others to approach their work with focus and deliberation, and every interaction with Henry reinforced the cultural lessons that had taken root. Even tasks that seemed mundane became opportunities to apply the principles exemplified in the race: steady effort, careful attention, and thoughtful execution. The story of the Cadillac and the Ferrari had evolved into more than an anecdote. It had become a touchstone for the company's values, an ever-present reminder that true influence is earned through consistency and character rather than status or spectacle. Jason Carter, now deeply reflective, had begun integrating the lessons into daily operations. He held leadership sessions emphasizing patience, preparation, and respect, encouraging managers to mentor their teams with care rather than assert authority through dominance. His own approach had shifted dramatically. He now listened more than he spoke, asked questions instead of giving orders, and evaluated results with a focus on skill, effort, and long-term impact. Employees noticed the change immediately. Meetings became collaborative, discussions more thoughtful, and innovation was nurtured through patience rather than rushed deadlines. The contrast with the previous environment was stark. The company was no longer a place where speed and showmanship ruled. Instead, competence and integrity were celebrated, and every employee understood that their contributions mattered in meaningful ways. Henry's influence extended beyond individual interactions. Employees began applying his principles to project management, deadlines, and team collaboration. Projects were planned meticulously, executed with care, and reviewed not only for efficiency but for quality and sustainability. Mentorship programs flourished, with senior employees guiding junior staff in ways that reinforced the values Henry had demonstrated. Recognition shifted as well. No longer was it enough to be visible or flashy. Employees were rewarded for consistent performance, thoughtful decision-making, and integrity. Henry's example had become a subtle but unshakable framework for excellence, shaping behaviors across departments and levels. The impact of the race was not limited to internal operations. Clients and business partners noticed the cultural shift, commenting on the company's renewed professionalism, collaboration, and reliability. The story of Henry and the Cadillac had become a conversation starter, a metaphor for consistency, skill, and quiet leadership that resonated across industries. Jason leveraged the narrative in presentations, emphasizing the lessons in patience, preparation, and character as pillars of the company's identity. The event had transformed from a viral spectacle into a lasting testament to how leadership, culture, and personal mastery can intersect to create meaningful change. Within the company, new employees were introduced to the story as part of onboarding, learning early on the value of patience, preparation, and integrity. Henry's example became a model for how to approach challenges, interact with colleagues, and influence outcomes without relying on status or showmanship. The principles he embodied, focus, consistency, and respect, were woven into performance evaluations, project assessments, and mentorship practices. The Cadillac's steady hum became a metaphorical symbol, reminding employees that enduring influence is built through deliberate, thoughtful action rather than short bursts of flashy performance. Jason continued to internalize these lessons. He held weekly review sessions, encouraging reflection on how employees could apply Henry's approach to real-world challenges. He emphasized that leadership is not demonstrated through wealth or authority alone, but through consistent demonstration of competence, patience, and integrity. Employees responded positively, embracing the lessons as a guide for decision-making, collaboration, and personal development. The company's culture became stronger, more cohesive, and more resilient, reflecting the values Henry had demonstrated and Jason had begun to adopt. Henry remained modest, never seeking recognition for his influence. He performed his duties with meticulous care, guiding projects, mentoring employees, and offering advice only when asked. His approach reinforced the cultural lessons quietly but powerfully, proving that leadership can emerge through mastery and character rather than position. Employees observed his interactions, learning from his example without the need for lectures or directives. The respect Henry earned was genuine, built on demonstrated skill, patience, and integrity rather than title or status. The media continued to highlight the race, drawing lessons about leadership, humility, and influence. Business publications analyzed the contrast between Jason's initial arrogance and Henry's composed mastery, citing the event as an example of how consistent competence can outweigh wealth and status. Leadership workshops referenced the story, teaching principles of patience, preparation, and humility. Henry's example had transcended the company, becoming a broader symbol of quiet leadership that resonated with professionals across industries. Internally, employees continued to implement lessons from Henry's example in concrete ways. Teams approached tasks with careful planning, balancing speed with quality. Recognition systems were redesigned to value consistency, effort, and integrity. Mentorship programs emphasized the importance of guiding others with patience and focus, reinforcing the behaviors Henry had demonstrated. Employees collaborated more effectively, respected differing perspectives, and sought to model their actions on the principles embodied by the race. The cultural transformation was evident in every department, a testament to the enduring influence of a single example. Jason reflected on his personal growth. He recognized that leadership requires humility, adaptability, and the ability to learn from unexpected situations. The parking lot race had been a catalyst, demonstrating that ego, authority, and and wealth could never replace skill, patience, and character. Jason actively mentored emerging leaders, emphasizing the principles Henry had exemplified. He reinforced the idea that influence is earned through consistent, deliberate, and principled action, rather than through spectacle or dominance. His personal evolution became a case study for employees, illustrating that even leaders accustomed to authority can change when confronted with humility and excellence. Henry's legacy within the company continued to strengthen. His calm mastery became the standard against which decisions, behaviors, and leadership were measured. Employees sought his counsel not for accolades, but for insights into focus, strategy, and composure. The Cadillac, now symbolic of steady effort and enduring mastery, was referenced frequently in discussions, projects, and evaluations. Henry had transformed from a background figure into a living example of how consistent skill, patience, and integrity could shape a company's culture and inspire lasting change. The lessons of the race, reinforced through Henry's example, became ingrained in the company's identity. Employees approached challenges with measured focus, leaders demonstrated humility and attentiveness, and collaboration replaced ego-driven competition. Recognition systems rewarded sustained effort and consistent skill, creating an environment where respect and competence were valued above all else. The story of the race, the Cadillac, and Henry's quiet mastery had evolved into a blueprint for cultural excellence, a guide for leadership, an enduring lesson in how character can redefine influence in any organization. Several months after the race, the company faced a new test of its transformed culture. A major project with a tight deadline and high-profile clients had landed on their desks, requiring coordination across multiple departments and demanding flawless execution. Previously, such pressure might have triggered panic, blame shifting, or ego-driven conflicts. Now the employees approached the challenge with a different mindset, shaped by the lessons of Henry Johnson and the infamous race. The principles of patience, preparation, and consistent effort were ingrained, and every team member understood that collaboration and integrity were essential for success. Jason Carter watched the project unfold from his office, observing how the teams operated. Employees communicated efficiently, sharing updates and asking questions without fear of judgment or retribution. Teams coordinated schedules, double-checked resources, and carefully allocated responsibilities, each person mindful of their role and its impact on the whole project. The environment was charged with focus rather than competition, with an underlying confidence that the challenge could be met through thoughtful execution. Jason realized that the culture had evolved profoundly. The lessons from the race had permeated every corner of the organization, guiding behavior and decision-making even under pressure. Henry Johnson played his usual role, overseeing the operational aspects of the project while continuing his janitorial duties. His attention to detail, patience, and steady approach became a stabilizing influence. When issues arose, Henry guided colleagues through problem-solving with calm, methodical advice, never imposing authority but allowing solutions to emerge naturally. Employees sought his perspective because of the clarity and consistency he demonstrated, not because of his title or position. Every interaction reinforced the values that had emerged from the race of focus, patience, and integrity were now the standards by which work and behavior were measured. As the deadline approached, unexpected complications threatened to derail the project. A critical supplier missed a shipment, and a key piece of software experienced a temporary malfunction. Previously, these challenges might have resulted in frantic emails, finger-pointing, or rushed fixes that compromised quality. Now, teams approached the issues systematically, assessing the problems, weighing solutions, and implementing changes with precision. The calm, methodical approach that Henry had exemplified during the race had become a cultural norm, providing a foundation for decision-making under pressure. Employees demonstrated resilience and adaptability, solving complex problems without panic, ego, or blame. Jason observed the situation closely, impressed by how the teams handled the pressure. Employees remained professional, collaborative, and focused, even as stakes rose and the client demanded updates. He recognized that the cultural shift was real and impactful. The lessons of the race had not only survived time, but had been applied to high-pressure scenarios with remarkable success. The company's ability to maintain composure, address challenges methodically, and collaborate effectively reflected a transformation that went far beyond a viral event in a parking lot. The cultural foundations Henry had inspired were now tested in a practical, consequential setting. As the project continued, teams began to take initiative, anticipating problems before they occurred and proposing solutions proactively. Employees referenced principles learned from Henry's example: patience in planning, consistent follow-through, and respect for the expertise of colleagues. Meetings became constructive forums for problem-solving rather than arenas for ego or power displays. Employees listened to one another, evaluated risks realistically, and communicated transparently with leadership. The influence of Henry's example extended to every interaction, ensuring that the company operated with both efficiency and integrity. Jason himself contributed differently than he would have in the past. Rather than asserting authority through directives, he focused on facilitating collaboration, offering guidance when appropriate, and providing resources for teams to succeed. He refrained from micromanaging or using his position to dominate decisions. Instead, he modeled the lessons of patience and strategic thinking, reflecting the growth he had achieved from the lessons of the race. Employees responded positively, demonstrating respect, engagement, and a willingness to apply critical thinking and careful judgment rather than simply following instructions. When the supplier issue was resolved and the software glitch fixed, the project progressed smoothly to completion. Teams conducted thorough quality checks, ensuring that deliverables met both internal standards and client expectations. Every decision reflected the principles Henry had demonstrated: meticulous attention to detail, focus, and steady execution under pressure. The result was a flawless delivery, earning praise from clients and internal leadership alike. The success was not the product of a single individual's heroics, but of a collective effort guided by a culture of competence, patience, and integrity. Employees reflected on the process, discussing what worked and how the lessons of the race and Henry's influence had guided their decisions. They noted that the company now operated differently under pressure. Collaboration replaced competition, thoughtful execution replaced rushed action, and respect replaced intimidation. The race had become more than a story. It had become a guide for behavior under real-world stress, a benchmark for how to respond when stakes were high. The influence of Henry's calm mastery was evident in every interaction, and employees took pride in applying these principles successfully. Jason addressed the company in a meeting following the project's completion. He acknowledged the lessons employees had applied, highlighting the importance of patience, skill, and integrity in achieving success. He praised Henry's example, reinforcing the values that had guided the project. Employees responded with appreciation, understanding that leadership was now about modeling behavior and creating an environment where competence, collaboration, and character could thrive. The message was clear: success under pressure is not determined by ego or spectacle, but by consistent application of skill, patience, and respect for others. Henry continued his work, quietly observing and providing guidance when asked. His influence remained understated but profound. Employees approached him for advice, inspired by his calm, methodical approach to challenges. He reinforced the lessons of patience, preparation, and focus, ensuring that the cultural transformation he had initiated continued to guide behavior. The Cadillac, once a relic of the past, remained a symbol of steady progress and mastery, reminding everyone that influence and respect are earned through action rather than asserted through status. By the time the project concluded successfully, the company had undergone a practical test of its cultural transformation. The values Henry had exemplified during the race, patience, skill, and integrity, were fully operational in real-world conditions. Employees had internalized these principles, applying them under pressure to achieve outstanding results. Jason recognized the magnitude of the change, understanding that leadership was now a shared endeavor, guided by character and competence rather than ego or authority. The race had become more than a story; it was a framework for sustainable excellence under any circumstance. Months later, the project's success continued to influence the company's culture. Employees shared the story internally, using it to mentor new hires and reinforce best practices. Leadership emphasized the lessons learned, integrating them into training, performance evaluations, and project management protocols. The influence of Henry's example had reached a point where it was no longer an anecdote, but a foundational element of corporate identity. The Cadillac, the race, and Henry's calm mastery had reshaped the company's approach to pressure, collaboration, and decision-making, proving that consistent, principled action outlasts ego, status, and spectacle. As the company continued to evolve, the story of Henry Johnson and the 1930 Cadillac became more than a legend; it became a defining narrative of the organization's identity. The cultural transformation that had begun with a single race now permeated every aspect of the business. Employees approached their work with an unprecedented level of focus, patience, and collaboration. Every team member understood that success was not measured by individual spectacle, position, or the speed of results, but by the consistency, integrity, and thoughtfulness brought to each task. Meetings, once dominated by competitive posturing and ego, had shifted into forums for constructive problem-solving and strategic planning. Jason Carter, now a markedly different leader, embraced these lessons fully. He held weekly check-ins with department heads to ensure that projects were guided by the principles Henry had exemplified: careful preparation, steady execution, and respectful collaboration. Jason also spent time mentoring emerging leaders, teaching them to lead by example and to earn influence through skill and integrity rather than through authority alone. Employees noticed the difference immediately. The CEO, once known for arrogance and spectacle, now modeled patience and humility, creating an environment where leadership was accessible and respected across all levels of the company. Henry, continuing his work quietly, became the linchpin of this cultural shift. He maintained his meticulous routines, offering advice and guidance only when sought. His calm, methodical approach to challenges inspired employees to emulate his example. The lessons of the race had become ingrained in the company's operations. Employees were no longer motivated by fear or competition alone. They understood that mastery, patience, and consistent effort were the keys to recognition and influence. The Cadillac, with its steady hum and unassuming presence, became a symbol of these values. Its image appeared in internal communications, informal presentations, and even training materials as a reminder that resilience and skill often trumped flashiness and ego. The company faced new high-stakes projects in the months following the cultural transformation. These initiatives required cross-functional collaboration, strategic problem-solving, and careful risk management. Employees approached these challenges with confidence, relying on the principles that had been reinforced through Henry's example. Project plans were meticulously crafted with clear contingencies and attention to detail. Meetings focused on solutions rather than blame. Communication was transparent, respectful, and constructive. When obstacles arose, teams addressed them methodically, anticipating complications rather than reacting impulsively. Jason observed these developments with a sense of cautious pride. He realized that the lessons from the race had created a sustainable framework for organizational behavior. Leadership, mentorship, and employee engagement had all improved as a result. Employees who had once been hesitant to voice opinions now participated actively, confident that their ideas would be considered thoughtfully. Mistakes were analyzed constructively, with a focus on learning and improvement rather than punishment. The culture had shifted from one of reactive competition to proactive collaboration, guided by the principles of consistency, patience, and respect. External recognition soon followed. Clients and business partners noticed the difference in how the company operated under pressure. Projects were delivered on time and with exceptional quality. Teams demonstrated resilience and professionalism, reflecting the cultural values that Henry had instilled through his example. The media, once captivated by the viral spectacle, now highlighted the company as a model of cultural transformation. Analysts wrote about the unusual and inspiring story of a janitor teaching leadership lessons to a CEO, and business schools began using the case as a teaching example. Henry's quiet mastery had transcended the company, becoming a symbol of effective leadership, patience, and integrity across industries. The story also had an impact on employee engagement and retention. Individuals felt empowered to take initiative, contribute ideas, and pursue excellence, knowing that their efforts would be recognized on the basis of skill and character rather than visibility or hierarchy. Mentorship programs flourished, fostering interdepartmental collaboration and long-term development. Employees spoke openly about how Henry's example had influenced their approach to work, noting that patience, preparation, and integrity had become the standard against which performance was measured. Recognition was no longer about fleeting achievements or superficial displays, it was about the consistent application of skill and thoughtfulness. Jason, reflecting on these developments, understood that true leadership required humility and adaptability. The lessons from the race had forced him to reconsider his assumptions about influence, respect, and authority. He had learned that leadership is most effective when grounded in competence, consistency, and character. By modeling these values, he was able to foster an environment in which employees could thrive, innovate, and contribute meaningfully. The contrast between his former ego-driven leadership and his current approach was stark, illustrating the transformative power of humility and example in shaping organizational culture. Henry remained an unassuming figure despite his outsized influence. Employees sought his guidance on technical challenges, project planning, and interpersonal dynamics. His advice was always measured, thoughtful, and grounded in experience. He never demanded recognition, yet his influence was undeniable. The principles he demonstrated, patience, steady progress, and respect, had become embedded in the company's DNA. Every project, every collaboration, and every decision was subtly shaped by the lessons learned from his example. The Cadillac, a symbol of enduring mastery, continued to inspire employees to prioritize quality, preparation, and thoughtful action over speed or spectacle. By the end of the year, the company's cultural transformation was evident in every department. Metrics of performance, collaboration, and employee engagement had improved significantly. Projects were executed efficiently with fewer errors and greater client satisfaction. Employees approached challenges strategically, applying the lessons of patience and preparation consistently. Leadership at all levels had shifted from authoritarian or ego-driven models to one guided by respect, mentorship, and example. The story of the race, the Cadillac, and Henry's quiet mastery had become a cornerstone of the company's identity, shaping behavior, expectations, and outcomes in profound way. Jason held a company-wide meeting to reinforce these lessons formally. He acknowledged Henry's impact, celebrating the principles that had guided the organization's patience, skill, integrity, and respect. Employees responded enthusiastically, recognizing that the story was not just entertainment but a living guide for behavior and decision-making. The culture that had been catalyzed by a single race had matured into a sustainable system, fostering both individual growth and collective success. Jason emphasized that leadership is not a product of position or wealth, but of example, consistent action, and principled behavior. Henry, observing quietly, continued his work without fanfare. His influence remained understated yet profound. Employees approached him for advice and guidance, inspired by his calm, deliberate approach to challenges. The lessons he had exemplified in the race, patience, preparation, and steady mastery were now fully integrated into the company's culture. The Cadillac, once a relic of the past, symbolized enduring values, resilience, integrity, and the quiet power of consistent action. The race had proven that influence and respect are earned through character and competence, leaving an indelible mark on the organization and its people. By the close of the year, the company had transformed into a model of cultural excellence. The lessons of Henry Johnson and the 1930 Cadillac were visible in daily interactions, project execution, and leadership decisions. Employees embraced the principles of patience, mastery, and integrity, applying them to every aspect of work. Jason Carter had evolved into a leader who exemplified humility and mentorship. The story of the race, once a viral spectacle, had become a defining narrative of the company's identity, demonstrating that leadership, influence, and respect are best earned through deliberate, principled, and consistent action. The final chapter of the story unfolded not with a dramatic race or public spectacle, but with the quiet culmination of months of cultural transformation. Henry Johnson, the unassuming janitor who had once challenged a CO in a parking lot, had become the embodiment of patience, mastery, and integrity across the company. His actions had inspired a profound shift in behavior, attitudes, and expectations, creating a workplace where competence, consistency, and respect were valued above status or ego. The company's identity had been reshaped, and the lessons of that singular race now guided the organization at every level, influencing decisions, interactions, and long-term strategy. Jason Carter had completed a personal transformation that mirrored the changes in the company. Once known for his arrogance and reliance on wealth and spectacle, he had embraced humility, reflection, and principled leadership. His approach had shifted from asserting dominance to cultivating respect, mentoring employees, and modeling the values he had learned from Henry. Weekly leadership sessions reinforced these principles, ensuring that the lessons of patience, preparation, and integrity became a permanent part of the company's culture. Jason's credibility had grown, not because of wealth or authority, but because he had demonstrated the capacity to learn, adapt, and lead with character. The employees, now fully immersed in this cultural framework, approached challenges with thoughtfulness and precision. Projects were executed with careful planning, collaboration, and adherence to standards of quality. Mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than causes for blame. Mentorship flourished, with experienced staff guiding newcomers through processes and decisions, ensuring that the principles of patience, consistency, and integrity were transmitted throughout the organization. The story of Henry and the Cadillac had become a reference point, guiding behavior and decision-making in ways that were both practical and inspiring. The company's external reputation had been transformed alongside its internal culture. Clients, partners, and industry observers noted the shift in professionalism, collaboration, and reliability. The story of Henry Johnson had reached beyond Silicon Valley, becoming a case study in leadership, character, and organizational culture. Articles in business journals and online platforms highlighted the lesson: true influence is earned through competence, patience, and integrity, not through status, wealth, or public spectacle. The company had become a model of sustainable excellence, admired not only for its products but for the culture that guided its people. Henry continued to exemplify the values he had demonstrated during the race. He approached each day with careful attention, deliberate focus, and unwavering commitment to quality. Employees sought his guidance, learning not only technical skills but also the principles of steady, principled action. His influence was profound yet understated. He never demanded recognition, yet every decision and interaction reinforced the lessons of patience, skill, and integrity. The Cadillac, once a simple, overlooked vehicle, had become a symbol of enduring values, reminding employees that slow, steady, and deliberate action could surpass even the flashiest display of power. Jason reflected often on the long-term impact of the race. He recognized that leadership is measured not by position or wealth, but by the ability to influence others through example, to cultivate respect, and to demonstrate consistent character. He shared these insights openly, mentoring managers and emerging leaders in the company. By emphasizing the principles embodied by Henry, Jason ensured that the lessons would endure, guiding behavior and decisions long after any single event. Employees learned to approach challenges with preparation, focus, and humility, applying these lessons to both everyday tasks and high-pressure situations. The company's milestones now reflected this cultural transformation. Projects that might have previously been chaotic or competitive were now executed smoothly, with clear communication, careful planning, and mutual support. Employees collaborated effectively, drawing on the skills and insights of one another. Leadership was distributed, with team members stepping forward to offer solutions, guidance, and expertise, all while adhering to the principles of respect and patience. The culture that had been sparked by Henry's quiet mastery in a parking lot now permeated every aspect of the organization, ensuring sustainable success in a cohesive work environment. Jason also began participating in external speaking engagements, sharing the story and lessons with other companies, business schools, and professional networks. He emphasized that influence and leadership are earned through consistent demonstration of competence, humility, and integrity. He highlighted Henry's example as the benchmark for how a single individual, acting with calm mastery and principled focus, could reshape an entire organization. These talks reinforced the narrative, inspiring leaders and employees outside the company to reconsider their approach to authority, respect, and teamwork. The employees continued to apply these lessons daily. They approached challenges methodically, respected the expertise of their colleagues, and prioritized collaboration over competition. Recognition programs were aligned with these values, rewarding consistent effort, integrity, and the application of skill. Mistakes were analyzed constructively, and learning from failure became a key part of the culture. Every interaction, project, and decision reflected the principles exemplified by Henry, embedding the lessons of the race into the fabric of the organization. The story of the race and Henry's influence had enduring effects on employee morale and retention. Staff felt empowered to take initiative, offer solutions, and contribute meaningfully to projects, knowing that their efforts would be recognized based on skill and character rather than visibility or status. Mentorship programs flourished, with experienced employees guiding others in ways that reinforced the lessons learned from Henry. The company's culture had matured into a system where influence, respect, and leadership were earned through consistent, principled action, ensuring that the organization was resilient and adaptive to future challenges. By the end of the year, the narrative of Henry Johnson and the Cadillac had become a permanent part of the company's identity. New hires learned the story as part of onboarding, and long-term employees shared it regularly as a reminder of the values that guided their work. Jason Carter had fully embraced the lessons of humility, patience, and principled leadership, ensuring that the culture would endure and continue to shape behavior, decisions, and outcomes. The company had not only survived a viral spectacle but had transformed it into a foundation for sustainable excellence, demonstrating the enduring power of character, skill, and integrity. The final image that remained with employees, clients, and the public was simple yet profound: a classic Cadillac moving steadily across the parking lot, a janitor guiding its progress with calm precision, and a wealthy CEO riding as a passenger, learning the value of patience, humility, and principled action. That image symbolized the transformation of leadership, culture, and perception, illustrating that true influence and lasting success are built not on status, power, or spectacle, but on the consistent application of competence, patience, and integrity. The legacy of Henry Johnson and the lessons of the race had become a timeless guide, inspiring generations of employees and leaders to lead with focus, humility, and character. The story of Henry Johnson and Jason Carter carries a profound lesson about the nature of leadership, respect, and influence, showing that true authority is earned through consistent action, integrity, and mastery rather than wealth, position, or spectacle. One of the most important lessons is that humility is not a weakness, but a critical component of effective leadership. Jason entered the parking lot with the confidence of a CEO who believed that status, wealth, and flashy displays would automatically command respect. He assumed that the Ferrari, a symbol of power and success, would assert his dominance without question. Yet the simple, deliberate actions of Henry, a man long overlooked and underestimated, shattered that assumption. Leadership is not about being the loudest voice in the room or the most conspicuous presence. It is about how one conducts oneself consistently, demonstrating competence, patience, and integrity. Henry's calm mastery highlighted the stark difference between ego-driven authority and authentic influence. This teaches leaders that influence is not granted by titles or possessions. It is earned by demonstrating the values and skills they wish to see reflected in their teams. Another key lesson is the transformative power of patience and preparation. In a world obsessed with speed, flashy performance, and immediate results, Henry's methodical approach reminded everyone that steady, deliberate effort often outlasts impulsive displays of dominance. While Jason relied on the raw speed of his Ferrari and the assumption of superiority, Henry relied on his knowledge, experience, and careful execution. The outcome of the race illustrated that preparation and focus under pressure can overcome even the most seemingly insurmountable advantages. For organizations, this means cultivating a culture that values planning, thoughtful execution, and risk assessment. Employees are most effective when they are trained to approach problems with composure and patience, rather than rushing to assert visibility or individual dominance. The race serves as a metaphor for workplace challenges. Success comes from consistency, attention to detail, and applying one's skills deliberately over time. Equally significant is the lesson regarding the impact of quiet influence. Henry never sought recognition, yet his example resonated more powerfully than any boastful display could have. Leadership and respect are often most enduring when they arise naturally from demonstration rather than proclamation. Employees observing Henry's behavior adopted his principles in their own work, applying patience, diligence, and integrity to projects and collaborations. This illustrates the idea that leaders do not need to dominate through force or position. They can guide culture and behavior by consistently modeling the standards they value. Influence built on skill, calm composure, and principled action is far more lasting than influence obtained through intimidation, wealth, or authority alone. In organizational terms, this teaches that mentoring, modeling good behavior, and embodying the company's values often carry more weight than titles, incentives, or hierarchy. The story also emphasizes the importance of adaptability and self-reflection in leadership. Jason's journey from arrogance to humility demonstrates that even the most powerful leaders must be willing to examine themselves, acknowledge mistakes, and adjust their approach. True leadership requires introspection and the capacity to learn from unexpected challenges. The parking lot race forced Jason to confront his assumptions, reevaluate his methods, and recognize that respect is earned through example rather than imposed through fear or spectacle. This underscores a broader lesson for professionals at all levels: adaptability, openness to feedback, and the willingness to learn from others regardless of their position are critical traits for sustainable success. Leadership without reflection risks stagnation and eventual failure, while humility allows for growth, influence, and lasting impact. Moreover, the story teaches that culture is shaped more by consistent behavior than by formal rules or directives. The company's transformation occurred not because of memos or mandates, but because employees observed and internalized Henry's principles. Patience, focus, respect, and integrity became embedded in the organization's DNA, guiding behavior under pressure and during collaboration. The lessons from the race became a framework for daily actions, decision-making, and leadership development. For modern organizations, this highlights the power of leading by example of the behaviors of a few key individuals, particularly those who demonstrate skill. Patience and character can influence and reshape an entire corporate culture. It reinforces the idea that cultural change is most effective when it is observed and internalized, not simply mandated. Finally, the story offers a broader life lesson: the value of recognizing and respecting talent, regardless of status. Henry, a janitor who had long gone unnoticed, became the catalyst for meaningful change. This challenges conventional assumptions about who holds influence and reminds us that every individual has the capacity to teach, lead, and inspire through competence, integrity, and character. It encourages organizations and individuals to look beyond titles, appearances, and social hierarchies when assessing potential and contribution. True respect and recognition come from understanding the capabilities and virtues of others and fostering environments where these qualities can flourish. In conclusion, the story of Henry Johnson and Jason Carter illustrates that leadership is defined not by wealth, power, or spectacle, but by the consistent application of skill, patience, integrity, and humility. Influence is earned through example, culture is shaped by observed behavior, and respect arises from competence and principled action rather than status or ego. For individuals and organizations alike, the lesson is clear: success is built on deliberate effort, thoughtful execution, and consistent demonstration of character. The race in the parking lot serves as a vivid metaphor for life and work: steady mastery and integrity triumph over arrogance and flashiness, and humility combined with competence leaves an enduring impact that outlasts wealth, authority, or fleeting displays of power. By internalizing these lessons, leaders and employees alike can foster environments of collaboration, respect, and sustainable success, ensuring that influence and leadership are grounded in principles that endure through every challenge and opportunity. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.